you ready?
Welcome to our Charter Road Hospitality Studios here at the Hampton Inn in Oxford, Mississippi by Jackson Avenue. This is Hotty Toddy Hotline. Welcome. I'm your host, Browning Stubbs. The Ole Miss football team, they've had a week off, a bye week, to really think about how they're going to approach the last two games of the season. Coming up this Saturday, the mighty LSU Tigers come to Oxford for a interesting game against the Ole Miss Rebels, which should basically set up who gets second place in the SEC West. And for that, we're going to talk to Chad LaBorde from our sister show on CRM Sports Network, the Louisiana State Roar show. We'll talk with Chad. He'll preview LSU. And then we're going to talk with the Ole Miss Spirit, Sudu Upadhyay. And Sudu and I will talk about Ole Miss football, some Rebel hoops as well. So not just football we're talking about. We'll get into basketball. Both the men's and women's basketball teams have started the season. I'll tell you the update on those teams and where they stand early on in the season. Just a few more football shows coming up on Hotty Toddy Hotline. You don't want to miss this. LSU, though this is not the game that many fans thought it would be. I think a lot of people thought the winner of this game might possibly win the SEC West, but nonetheless, they are still coming into town. It's going to be a great rivalry game at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium coming up on Saturday, and we have the full preview coming up on Hotty Toddy Hotline.
Because you want more flavor, at Nuke's we marinate and grill to perfection. Because you want the latest culinary tastes and trends, we never rest. At Nuke's, great food drives us. So we are meticulous in our preparation, obsessed with the quality of our ingredients, and uncompromising about serving you our very best. We believe that sharing a memorable meal is one of life's ultimate pleasures. Join us at Nuke's Eatery.
And welcome back in Hotty Toddy Hotline. We're now joined by Chad LaBorde of the Louisiana State Roar show on CRM Sports. Chad, how's it going?
Oh, pretty good.
Chad, Ole Miss-LSU, it's one of those games that I know you and I are both excited for, but let's kind of backtrack a little bit and kind of talk about these two teams and their seasons. First we'll start with the team that you covered, the LSU Tigers. This was a team, Chad, in my opinion, who I was very high on going into the season. I thought that, second year with Leonard Fournette at running back, that we would see a really dominant season from him, which we have. But he's been kind of, I don't want to say irrelevant the last two games, but he's not been the same player that he was earlier in the season. But it's a team, that they still struggle from the passing game with, at quarterback. But, Chad, I want to ask you, what happened with LSU? Hot start to the season, and then they ran into two teams, Alabama and Arkansas, that beat them.
Well, there's a number of things, and this week is going to be not as focused on the obvious, if you know what I mean. There is a real frustration right now with the higher-ups at LSU with Les Miles. And, look, we know about LSU, a certain portion of the fan base that, frankly, were never big on him, but I think the big boys, the TAF donors or the boosters or whatever you want to call them, the ones that always defended him and supported him, I think no longer feel that way. I think based on the results of last year, going into this year, a lot of optimism. Fournette, lost some weight. He was bigger and stronger. You saw how well he played in the first 7 games of the season. Heisman front runner up until the night they played in Tuscaloosa. And I think the thing that really surprises me about what took place against Alabama, not the fact that they lost, because they didn't really have them winning the football game, was the fact that their offensive line was so bad. We're talking about a line that was so dominant the first 7 weeks, and really throughout Miles' tenure. a line that looked real dominant for the most part. I mean, there were times where the line may have been a little less than what we've seen, but you got about, according to some pro scouts, about 3 to 4 guys on that line that could get drafted. And yet, Alabama was just pushing them around like rag dolls, like they were playing a Division III opponent. And that's the part that struck me. I knew the defensive line looked going into this season. If you look at what LSU had on paper, they didn't have a lot of depth there. They had about 4 guys actually, that were supposed to be on this season's roster. And over the summer, they either left on their own or they were kicked off for off-the-field issues. Trelio Malatapo, got involved in an off-the-field incident more than once. He was basically told not to come back. And he was not a 5-star, but at least a 3 to a 4-star, depending on what service you look at. You had a 5-star that would have been a tremendous defensive tackle in Trevante Valentine that didn't want to go to class, and after skipping so many classes, they basically said, you can't stay here. And then there was a 5-star from the state of Illinois that would have backed up Kendall Beckwith and at least gave him some time to take a breather. And Clifton Garrett from the state of Illinois, but he gets to Louisiana and figures out after he's here that he can't play in this humidity all the time. And he decides to go to the junior college route in Arizona, go figure that. But they don't have humidity, they just have a lot of heat, but whatever. So you got that. I think I left out one more, and that was Macadius Bain, another D tackle, who got in trouble, was involved in that incident involved Anthony Jennings and Dwayne Thomas about recovering Jennings' belongings back over the summer, and for whatever reason, Bain decided to transfer. I don't know if there was more to that involving him personally, but he's not there, and he was highly recruited. So you didn't have a lot of depth on that defensive line. RDC, true freshman, having to play more than he should. Then you look at Kendall Beckwith, who's playing just about every snap, because behind him is a guy that's a 2-star special teams guy that has to be inserted at middle linebacker if Kendall Beckwith should go down. I mean, a huge, significant drop-off. So you could lay down on the blame of John Chavis for not recruiting last year, which he was never known for, but not at his special position at linebacker, as the linebackers coach. You could also blame that on Les Miles, who is the head coach, who should be telling John Chavis how to do his job if he chooses not to do it. I don't know what happened there. But they didn't sign a linebacker in this past recruiting class back in February. So, these are the things that add up after a while, and that's why you're seeing some elements on defense. Alex Collins, Derrick Henry bucks into the line like it's nothing, because you're seeing a team that lacks depth right now up front. And the secondary, let's face it, Kevin Steele wants to do more of a 2-gap zone and not so much man-to-man. So you got guys that were used to man-to-man like Tre'Davious White, Jalen Mills and all those guys back there that played for Chavis that have to now figure out how to play zone. So there's another problem, And maybe once they get the players they want there, and they probably go from a 4-3 to a 3-4 gradually, which is what Alabama's running because Steele came from there, then you'll probably have the right players for it. So there's a lot of different elements on that defense as to why they allowed 31 points scored by Arkansas and 30 points by Alabama. Alabama, we knew was going to be tough up front. They got the best defensive line stopping the run in the country, not just the conference. So I'm not surprised that they had that they dominated a little bit. I just didn't think that Leonard Fournette in a loss would have 31 yards. I would have thought at worst anywhere 80 to 100. And that's the part that shot me. At Arkansas, most of those players on that team were not blue chippers. LSU has the blue chippers, but yet Arkansas, like last year, again this year, kicked LSU around, and they did it on their home turf. So you have fans right now that, frankly, I'm not saying half the fan base, but there's a portion of it, maybe it is half, that probably wouldn't mind seeing Ole Miss winning on Saturday, because I think they want more than just Cam Cameron. They want Miles gone at this point. I really believe that, based on different people I know. And he's lost my support, I'll be honest with you. I tweeted that out Saturday night. how can you have a player of this caliber on your team? Something LSU hasn't had since 1959, and I hate to bring that up for Ole Miss fans, but when Billy Cannon had the Halloween run, you have a guy that, you've had to wait, 50-something years for maybe another Heisman Trophy winner, and you let your play calling and lack of vision on offense because you want to keep giving it to Fournette. Look, these guys like Ole Miss too. They've seen the Alabama film. Now they have the Arkansas film. They know what to do. Robbie Kindeji knows what to do. That defensive front will be all over Fournette and Brandon Harris. I think Brandon Harris is probably, has he slacked off a little bit? Maybe, but he don't have time to throw. And he has a winding delivery, which doesn't help him. He doesn't throw from the ear hole as effectively as most quarterbacks when he throws short passes. Occasionally he can do a screen, but when it comes to short intermediate passes, he's terrible at. He's got to throw downfield, but he's more accurate when he does that. But you got to give him time. They're not giving him time. Arkansas's defensive end stayed all over him. I know Gerald Hawkins got hurt in the first half against Arkansas, the left tackle. I understand that. And I understand KJ Malone is not a first-string left tackle. But you need to be coached up better. You get players for 3 years now, Dave, not 4. And I think LSU has done on the defensive line, frankly, and the offensive line, a poor job in getting these guys ready in key situations. And I think it falls back at the head coach. And it's kind of like the same situation right now. When do you stop blaming the D coordinator? Well, when do you stop blaming the offensive coordinator? At some point, you're the guy who hired him. And Les Miles is going through 5 offensive coordinators, one because of health reasons that's nobody's fault, but a grand total of 5 offensive coordinators in 11 seasons. And the only time he did anything different from what he's doing now was when he first got here with Jimbo Fisher, and that's why Fisher left, couldn't get along with Miles' vanilla offense. And basically what you see, and you've seen it enough to follow when Ole Miss plays LSU in the league, it's a 1970s and 80s, Bo Schembechler, Big Ten offense. That's what it is. 2 tights, 1 receiver out in the flat, a full back, your tailback, toss lead. And that's fine against South Carolina when they're not good. And that's fine against the poor Syracuse team. Not fine against Alabama. And some of the top-tier teams like Ole Miss, perhaps in the SEC, that has blue-chip guys, too. And I think he's finding that out. But he obviously has nightmares, maybe a little bit, from 2008 when Jarrett Lee had his Pick 6 campaign going on. And ever since that year, he has really gone into deep freeze with the offense. And you could say since 2009. Because if you followed LSU from 2005 to 2008, they were throwing the ball. Gary Croton had his best year in 2007. Probably the best offense Les Miles put out there when they won the national championship with a 50th senior at quarterback. So, I tell you what, they've come a long way since then offensively, but I think a lot of it is Miles hates turnovers. This is what he really wants to do. And he's determined that it's what it's going to be. And that's the frustrating part, and I think fans are getting restless, tired of it. Look, when it was 21-0 in the second quarter, a friend of mine who attended the game, a reliable friend that I can trust, said the fans were leaving. By halftime, half the stadium was filled only. So, fans are just getting tired, sick and tired of the same old stale offense that they've seen with all these quality athletes that Frank Wilson and his staff have recruited well on. And they feel like the talent's being wasted.
Chad, we're going to take a break, but we'll be back, and we're going to talk more Ole Miss and LSU. Chad thinks that Les Miles should be on the way out. Certainly a lot of jobs opening in college football. We'll see at the end of the season. Stay with us here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. Welcome back into Hotty Toddy Hotline. We're with Chad LaBorde of the Louisiana State Roar on the CRM Sports Network. All right, Chad, Ole Miss and LSU, we still got a football game to play, despite all the controversies that may surround both of these teams. But I did want to ask you quickly, it seems to me like you think that Fournette is out of the Heisman race. But I do want to add, when Tebow won the Heisman, his team went 8-4. So I don't really know, when Johnny Manziel won, his team went 9-3, I believe. So I don't really know if it matters about wins and losses. But why do you think he's like completely, out of the number one spot, despite his team, dropping 2 games?
Well, on the biggest stage of the year in Tuscaloosa, it wasn't his fault, but facts remain, he had 19 carries for 31 yards. And then when he plays against the worst defense in the league, up against them, and the offensive line can't block the 14th best defense out of 14 in the SEC, and he only gets 19 carries for 91 yards, he can't even get to over 100. And you got Derrick Henry going over 200 against LSU, over 200 against Mississippi State. And even though Fournette may still be the nation's leading rusher, I haven't looked at the stats lately, but Derrick Henry's right there. And he's probably going to close out pretty strong against Florida Atlantic and against a weak Auburn team. So I can't see how anyone could turn their backs on giving Derrick Henry this award now that Trevon Boykin is hurt and not playing and hasn't played well, going back to TCU's first loss. So, and then against Kansas, he got hurt, and they just barely got by what could be the worst Power 5 team in the country right now in the Jayhawks. So, right now, I think it's a Derrick Henry award, unless, heaven forbid something should happen to him. But the kid's earned it because he's had a better offensive line and a better coach team, a better play caller in Lane Kiffin than Cam Cameron. And look, you put Derrick Henry over here right now, and he's got the same problems Fournette has, and Fournette's, doing his thing over there at Alabama and probably winning the Heisman for sure. I mean, it's just a case of the offensive line not doing their job and poor play calling and poor execution by the coaching staff.
All right, Chad, Ole Miss and LSU. Let's get to the Ole Miss side of things. They've also had an up and down season. They're 7-3, and what I'd call it a disappointment. Considering this is the last year of the 2013 recruiting class, you're going to have guys like Laquan Treadwell, Laramie Tunsil, Robert Kimdichie go to the NFL, and it's kind of sad that they weren't able to bring home an SEC West banner to Oxford. But nonetheless, this game could decide second place in the SEC West. A big bowl game is at stake in this football game. But overall, what are your thoughts on Ole Miss, and what scares you about them against the Tigers?
Chad Kelly has an ability to make plays, and trust me, if Hugh Freeze were here to tell you, even though it won him the game or contributed to winning the game in Tuscaloosa for them back in September, you don't want your quarterback throwing the ball when he can't see clearly downfield. You usually take a sack, but it worked out. And sometimes you need to be a little lucky to win. Even when you win championships, the great teams can't always do it just on talent alone. Sometimes you have to have the football gods a little bit on your side. And certainly in that game, Chad Kelly and the team had that, because that eliminated Ole Miss from having to go to overtime against Alabama and put the Rebs in a situation where you got a team like the Tide with all that talent coming back. They got the momentum. They're playing at home. I know their fans were piling out of there too at that point. But, hey, Ole Miss did it 2 years in a row. I tip my hat off to the spread offense that confuses Nick Saban from time to time. Hugh Freeze knows how to put that offense on the field and make it effective. I think the only thing Ole Miss is missing probably is a big, nice running back like a Henry or a Fournette, or, not necessarily having to be of that caliber, but something similar. But at the same time, Chad Kelly's making plays. He's got a big receiver in Laquan Treadwell. He knows how to keep plays alive with his feet. I give him a lot of credit. I mean, this is a kid that's overcoming some adversity. He had some issues at Clemson and off the field a little bit at Ole Miss going into the season, but Hugh Freeze has worked with him, and now he's committed to playing. He's committed to being a good person and a good player on and off the field. So I think Chad Kelly and his feet could definitely put LSU in bind, because Lewis Neal, who's probably been the best defensive end right now this year, there's not too many of them they can rotate in this year for the Tigers, but that's a guy that I think he needs to look after on the edge, because he certainly leads the team in sacks right now. He's in the double digits this year. So LSU's had some bright spots up front on defense. I don't want to make it sound like it's all been sour, but they lack depth there, and I think that's something Kelly can exploit. because if you got guys like that, they have to stay in the game, 90% of the time, and they can keep running plays over and over, they're going to wear them down. And Laquan Treadwell gets some space with that two-gap zone, I think can make some, certainly can create some problems. If number 87 for Arkansas and certainly Calvin Ridley at Alabama can do it, Laquan Treadwell, I think, is the best receiver in the league, hands down, even post-injury. He's going to be an excellent pro as long as he's healthy. So I think this is a matchup I could see Vegas wanting to go with Ole Miss at home. They're 4.5-point favorite, and I'm surprised it's probably not 6.5 or 6 at this point. But it could be. Who knows as the week plays out. But I think the Rebels have an excellent shot because they, too, I think, despite what happened against the Razorbacks, I mean, that was, you talk about as awkward as it was for Ole Miss to beat Alabama, the way that play rolled out with Kelly back in September. It was as awkward, or if not more so, the way Hunter Henry threw that ball 10 yards behind his head, a Houdiniac by him and Alex Collins getting the 4th and 25 on his legs, and Hugh Freeze thinking he had the win for his club, and all of a sudden they decide that once they score to go for 2 right away because they knew they probably would lose on the road. They don't have the depth themselves of having to go the distance if they had to play several overtimes like they did back in 2001 when they faced each other. So, that was smart on Bielema's part, and I know that was a hurtful loss for Ole Miss. I can feel that pain there. I've been down there with LSU, so I think he's going to have his club ready. I mean, they've had a bye week. They're rested. They're not coming off of playing 2 teams that are physical like Arkansas and especially Alabama. And I think this hangover that Les Miles says is not real is real to a large extent, even with these young players at LSU.
All right, Chad. Well, Ole Miss-LSU should be a great one at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium on Saturday at 2:30. Both teams still playing for a lot down the stretch. You said Ole Miss was a 4.5-point favorite. Do you have a prediction for me?
I think Ole Miss wins the game. There's 2 ways this could go. If LSU chooses, and I think they can, to come out playing inspired with their heart, knowing that their coach is going to take a banging, and one thing they love about Miles is Miles will take the blame for things. I mean, he said it in his post-game press conference after Arkansas. He blamed himself for it, not his staff, not his players. He blamed him. And Miles is a great person. Like Hugh Freeze, very, spiritual guy, very good person, very father figure-like for his team. They love him. And trust me, this is not a Curly Hallman situation, back in the early 90s at LSU. I mean, the sky is not falling for them like it hasn't for Ole Miss. It's just that I think it could go one way in terms it could be very close, and Ole Miss, I think, could pull it out in a 3-point, a 6-point, 7-point game. Or, if they have a couple of things they have to overcome, some turnovers, penalties, some adversity, Ole Miss can run away with it like they did in 2008, the last time LSU lost a large spread at home before the Arkansas game was that 31-13 loss in Tiger Stadium when they saluted Billy Cannon, ironically, that afternoon. And then Arkansas hands them the worst loss in 31-14, 7 years or whatever, 6 years later, 8 years later. So, but on the road, I think they'll have the home field advantage, the Rebs, obviously. They'll be packed, they'll be ready, they'll be pumped, and I think they will be the victors. But whether or not it's going to be 31-14 or 27-20, I think it could go either way. It just depends on the psyche of LSU. Not so much on Ole Miss. I mean, they have to execute too, but it depends on the mental psyche of LSU, what adversity they have to overcome, if any. But I think at the end of the day, Ole Miss gets it because they're at home, and I just think they're a little more hungry right now, it appears, based on what we've seen out of the LSU ball club the last 2 weeks.
Chad LaBorde, I want to thank you for coming on the show this week, and it should be a great one in Oxford.
I appreciate you having me on, Browning. It's a pleasure.
All right, Chad, thank you. Follow him on Twitter at Chad LaBorde, host of Louisiana State Roar on the CRM Sports Network. Coming up on Hotty Toddy Hotline, we'll be joined by Sudu Upadhyay of the Ole Miss Spirit, and we'll talk more Ole Miss-LSU.
Hey, Rebels, your truck is here. Allen Samuels Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram in Oxford presents the all-new Ram Rebel. It's Ram, the Rebel way. Send an unmistakable signal. Rebel 24/7. Ram Rebel from your friend in the car business. Allen Samuels Chrysler Dodge Jeep Ram in Oxford.
Come by, let's be friends.
Welcome back to Hotty Toddy Hotline. Now joined by my buddy Sudu Upadhyay of the Ole Miss Spirit. Sudu, how's it going?
How's it going, Browning? Good to be here, man.
It's going good. It's LSU week. We're pretty much battling for second place in the SEC West, right?
Yeah, I guess you're right. If you look at it a certain way, I guess you could look at it that way. But I think with Alabama winning yesterday, I don't know. Ole Miss's odds don't look that good.
No, you'd have to get a Auburn win, and Ole Miss would have to win out. So, in Auburn, that defense is horrendous. So I doubt that'll happen.
Yeah, I don't see it happening. I think everybody's listening to us knows that we're joking around.
But, Sudu, we do have a game that has big bowl aspirations. Ole Miss and LSU this Saturday, 2:30 at Vaught Amway Stadium. Sudu, the Rebels coming off that heartbreaking loss to Arkansas. You've been an Ole Miss fan for years. I'm sure that ranks towards the top for you as far as heartbreaking losses go. But, having that bye week, I think you got to agree that certainly that bye week, hopefully that helped this team from crashing down the ship, because if they didn't have that bye week, I could have seen this season going bad real fast.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. The bye week really helped. I think if Ole Miss had it earlier in the season, you could have possibly seen some games go different ways, but, you can't really dwell on that. But I agree. Tony Connor passed the test for his knee, so he's a little bit healthier. And some of those guys, just, little injuries you get with football, get to rest, and, coaches get to go recruit. It's just a good week off for everybody. And now, this week they'll have to jump back into it and prepare for a very tough LSU team.
Speaking of that LSU team, Sudu, through the first, 8 games of the season, we thought that one player, Leonard Fournette, could not be stopped. He racked up 200 yards per game, it seemed like. But now it's starting to seem like teams are figuring him out. Arkansas held them under 100 yards. Alabama held them to like 31. So he's human after all. So Ole Miss can stop him. I'm assuming that makes you feel a lot better as an Ole Miss fan that he's not, the player that we thought he was.
Yeah, well, I think as the season goes on, there's going to be a little wear and tear to him, and teams start figuring out how the guy runs, what holes to attack, all these things, and you spend so much time trying to stop one player. Eventually, you're going to get to that. Alabama gave everybody a really good model, I think. Of course, the Crimson Tide are one of the best teams in the country in terms of stopping the run, and I think they kind of gave a model to Arkansas. Arkansas did a good job, and then obviously Ole Miss now can sort of look at how to do that, but Alabama's a good team that can stop the run. Arkansas has sort of been decent this year, but Ole Miss has been good, too. They've been allowing around 3 yards per rush. So this defense, if they can handle Leonard Fournette, you never know what could happen just because of the fact that LSU can't really throw the ball as well as maybe some other teams Ole Miss has played in the conference this season.
Yes, you do. And Ole Miss, the offense didn't have any trouble against Arkansas. The defense certainly struggled. You said Tony Connor looks a lot better, but what do you think else that they got to fix in order to stop the LSU Tigers?
Well, obviously the defenses cannot play the way they did against Arkansas. I think the secondary definitely has a lot of issues, a lot of different problems throughout. Some of the players maybe are not as good as we thought, but having a healthier Tony Connor should help with that. The biggest thing, obviously, is going to have to be stopping Leonard Fournette. Ole Miss's linebackers haven't been that great this season. They're going to really need to step up in this game, I think, and get, early to the line of scrimmage as soon as Fournette gets the ball and stop them for some losses or, 1 or 2 yard gains. That will really stop this LSU offense. And, of course, Ole Miss playing at home, the offense for the Rebels should be able to score enough in this game for the defense to have, some time to stop LSU. And that's the only way I think Ole Miss can win is if they stop LSU's ground attack. And, passing the ball, LSU probably will see a little bit of success against Ole Miss just based off how we've seen the secondary play. But that's not their strong suit, and I think this Ole Miss secondary, if they really key in on Brandon Harris, they have a really good shot at upsetting the Tigers.
Yeah, it's going to be a great one. Now, Sudu, wanted to talk to you about the 2013 recruiting class. Laramie Tunsil, Robert Condici, Laquan Treadwell. Their goal was to come in to win the SEC West. I understand this year the Tunsil suspension, kind of kind of put a bad light on the team, might have cost them a couple wins. But, overall, they probably, yes, they're still alive, but I doubt Alabama will lose to Auburn. So do you consider, the class a bust, since they weren't able to bring the banner to Oxford?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say the class was a bust. I would just say, they weren't used to their full potential. I think what this class did at Ole Miss was tremendous. I mean, you expected them to play big, take Ole Miss to that national conversation where they weren't before they came in. But, overall, the goal was to win an SEC title and compete for a national championship, and they didn't do that. But I don't put that on the class. A lot of different things happened, injuries, of course, Tunsil having to sit out a few games. But, this blame definitely a little bit falls on the coaching staff, and, some things just sort of fall on injuries. And, I hate using the word bad luck, but a little bit of bad luck as well.
And, Sudu, we saw some quotes this past week in the media about, who might go to the NFL. I mean, I think we're pretty certain that Treadwell, Tunsil, Kimdichie are going. But then, some other guys, there's some uncertainty, Tony Connor, Chad Kelly, Evan Ingram. I mean, do you think that the three of them that I just said will probably stay for their senior seasons?
Absolutely. I think Evan and Tony staying is, pretty certain. Chad, of course, as well. I think, outside of those three guys, obviously Laquan, Robert, and Laramie, all projected to go within the top 10 of the NFL draft in some of the latest mock drafts that I've seen. And those three, were expected to leave. Tony was kind of in that group, too. Of course, he got hurt. But, they sort of have, I think, played enough at Ole Miss. It'd be good to have them back for another season next year with some of the recruits that are possibly coming into Ole Miss, paired with Chad Kelly's, second season in this offense. But obviously they have to get their big checks and move on to the NFL. So, that's understandable.
And, you also cover recruiting as well. Shea Patterson, he's been in Oxford a couple times in the fall, and he was even at an Oxford high school game chatting with DK Metcalf. You don't see any reason to worry if you're an Ole Miss fan about him possibly changing his commitment with the way the team has played the last few weeks?
No, absolutely not. I think Shea is fully in. His parents are fully in. Obviously, his brother Sean is a part of the football staff at Ole Miss. There's a very, very, very low chance of Shea decommitting from Ole Miss, and it would take something big for that to happen. So as of now, Shea's all about Ole Miss. He's been actively recruiting a lot of good players, guys like Drake Davis, Greg Little, Willie Allen, a lot of different guys around the country, some top recruits. Shea's been doing a good job of recruiting. So no reason to worry there at all. And, he's even said it. The coaches have told him that he'll have a shot to compete, but more likely probably won't play because of Chad Kelly. So he's all about Ole Miss, loves it, loves the coaching staff, and I don't think there's any threat of him decommitting.
Ole Miss-LSU coming up this Saturday, but we're going to take a break. On the other side, we're going to talk with Sudu about Ole Miss basketball. Stay with us here on Hotty Toddy Hotline. Welcome back to Hotty Toddy Hotline. We're now on the phone with Sudu Upadhyay of the Ole Miss Spirt. Sudu, we just talked Ole Miss football. Now let's talk some hoops. Ole Miss, they did get the victory, their first game of the season, beating Northwestern State 90-76. Thoughts on the season opener?
I thought it was pretty good. Obviously, there are a little bit of problems on defense, but they fixed some of the things compared to the exhibition game. Andy Kennedy called their performance against Clayton State in the exhibition atrocious, and then he came back in the season opener and called it pretty good. So obviously they did some things to improve. Stephon Moody's still Stephon Moody. Kennedy said he had a ho-hum game, but, he ended up putting up 29 points, which tied his career high. Obviously, Sebastian Saiz is a force on defense, really the biggest guy on the team, 14 rebounds, 16 points. And another guy, Browning, that really caught my eyes, Rasheed Brooks. I don't think a lot of people are talking about him right now, but he's pretty clutch. He kind of reminds me of Snoop White, maybe a bigger Snoop White, and I think he'll end up being pretty good for Ole Miss as well. And in terms of point guard play, Sam Finley started. There was a little bit of a competition going on between him and JP Escobar, but Finley, ended up proving that he's probably the better, option at that position. Puts up a good amount of points as well, 16 points. And, I thought they looked pretty good offensively. I think this team will be able to put up a lot of points this year, but there are definitely some questions on defense still.
We talked about Stephon Moody, scoring 29 points in the season opener. How much more do you think he can give this team this year than he did last year? I mean, it seemed like he was running some of the similar sets that he ran last year in the game against Northwestern State. But, I mean, is he going to have to be a guy that's going to have to put up, Jimmer Fredette type numbers, 25 points per game, or can he still be at the level he played last year if the team wants to be successful and try to make a tournament run again?
I think he can play a little bit similar to last year, but maybe scoring a little bit more. AK has said he takes some questionable shots every now and then, but he kind of has that right. He's earned the right to do that. Kind of that green light, sort of like Marshall Henderson used to have when he played here, to just shoot the ball whenever he feels like he has a good look. And I think having that kind of green light and that approval from the coaches is going to help this Ole Miss team a lot, because Stephon is very confident whenever he shoots the ball. I don't think, like you said, I don't think he needs to have, Jimmer Fredette type production for Ole Miss to be successful, because Ole Miss does have some more options. And once these younger guys start gelling together, some more communications issues, get resolved, I think Ole Miss will have more shooters, and Stephon won't be the only guy they're going to need to rely on, but they will need to rely on him throughout the season, obviously.
His backcourt mate, you talked about that. Sam Finley, 16 points, 2 assists in the opener. Just first glance at the kid, seeing him in person, to me he seems very athletic, and I'm really excited about him, and hopefully he'll be really consistent, which Jarvis Summers was not last year. You mentioned Rasheed Brooks, but what newcomer on this team do you think is going to make the biggest impact this season?
That's a great question. There's a few guys like Tomas Giallo, obviously Rasheed and Sam, but I'm going to go with Sam. I think at point guard he's a great option. JT Escobar is good as well, and AK has talked about his ability to not turn the ball over. But outside of that, I think Sam just brings a scoring type of threat at that point guard position for Ole Miss. And you got to remember, both options Ole Miss has at point guard, both are really twos, truly. But, Sam's really shown a ability to play point guard. He can drive it in. He'll find holes, get to the basket. Even as sort of a smaller player, he can get in there with some bigger guys. So I think Sam Finley will be the guy.
Sudu, let's make predictions for this Ole Miss basketball team. I've been a little skeptical about Andy Kennedy's teams the last couple of years because, you said it, there are questions defensively. Can you really rely on Sebastian Saiz to be a guy that's going to protect that paint, get you a couple blocks per game? I think losing MJ Rhett, Dwight Colby might hurt a little bit defensively, but, I do think, when we compare Marshall Henderson to Stephon Moody, I think Moody is a little more consistent of a player. I think he's a smarter player, better defensively for sure, in my opinion. I feel a little bit better about this team than I did last year's team. I really like what I see from guys like Sam Finley. You mentioned it. Rasheed Brooks. Hopefully, guys like Mark Canvas Hyman will get some run, and very excited about Tomas's play as well. Just my personal opinion. It is very early to tell. To me, there's still a lot of questions defensively. Can Saiz be a consistent double-double player? Because you kind of need that guy if you're going to make an NCAA tournament run. I have him just from the outside looking in, but you might have a different opinion than I do.
I think I'm with you. They are a very undersized team. Their tallest guy is, I guess Saiz is around 6'9". I think Perez is around maybe the same, height, but they don't really have a guy above 6'9", and that's what makes you worry. Maybe playing some of these tougher teams in the SEC, and the SEC competition has grown. Obviously, LSU's got a lot of good recruits now. Mississippi State does. Alabama's going to be competing. You have a lot more tougher competition in the SEC, but I think Ole Miss, this scoring mentality, obviously the type of teams that Andy Kennedy likes to put on the court, this year that matches it more than ever, I think, over the last few years. And I think that will be Ole Miss's strong suit. As long as they can keep up with teams and put up points, I think Ole Miss will consistently, throughout the season, sort of be a bubble team. And towards the end of the year, depending on how they make a run in the SEC tournament, they'll end up getting a spot in the NCAA tournament.
Should be a fun season for Rebel Hoops. Hopefully there won't be a lot of heartbreak, because we've seen that with football the last couple of weeks.
Right.
All right, that's Sudu Upadhyay. Sudu, thank you for coming on Hotty Toddy Hotline. Follow him on Twitter at Sudu Upadhyay. Sudu, we'll talk to you down the road.
Sounds good, Browning. Thanks for having me.
All right, coming up on Hotty Toddy Hotline, we'll wrap up this week's show, and we'll talk more Ole Miss sports. Keep it here on Hotty Toddy Hotline.
Because you want more flavor, at Nuke's we marinate and grill to perfection. Because you want the latest culinary tastes and trends, we never rest. At Nuke's, great food drives us. So we are meticulous in our preparation, obsessed with the quality of our ingredients, and uncompromising about serving you our very best. We believe that sharing a memorable meal is one of life's ultimate pleasures. Join us at Nuke's Eatery.
Welcome back to Hotty Toddy Hotline. I want to thank Chad LaBorde, Louisiana State Roar, and Sudu Upadhyay of the Ole Miss Spirt for coming on the show this week to talk all things Ole Miss-LSU, plus Sudu talk some basketball with me. We also want to thank Charter Road Hospitality. We're broadcasting this week's show from the Hampton Inn in Oxford, and this is a beautiful place to come stay. They got great continental breakfast in the morning, coffee all the time. 24 hours you can get your coffee, so don't miss the great amenities that this place has to offer. And with football season wrapping up, surely there should be availability for you to have a nice stay with your family, or if you're on business, whatever. Call them, located at 110 Heritage Drive, 662-232-2442. Also, if you want to check out another property right across the street from by the Huddle House, 112 Heritage Drive, that's the Holiday Inn Express. Call them 662-236-2500. And also by the Oxford Conference Center is the newest Charter Road Hospitality called the Town Place Suites, located at 105 Ed Perry Boulevard, 662-238-3522. And, of course, the other Hampton Inn in Oxford, located at 103 Ed Perry Boulevard. Go also stay there. Call them 662-234-5565. So Charter Road Hospitality, don't miss out on their beautiful places to stay in Oxford. Basketball coming up, the Pavilion opening up in January. You don't want to miss opening weekend, which starts January 7th for the men's game as they take on Alabama. The women's game, they take on the Florida Gators on January 10th. So book a hotel with Charter Road Hospitality. Upcoming schedule this week for Rebel Hoops. We know football plays LSU at 2:30 at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium on Saturday. Ole Miss basketball, they are going to be headed to Charleston, South Carolina this week for the Gildan Charleston Classic, as Ole Miss has 3 games scheduled against. First one will be on Thursday, as the Rebels will take on George Mason. That's a team that's out of the Colonial Athletic Conference. They're a team that is always in the hunt. They're a team that usually makes the NCAA tournament, so that's going to be a great test for the Rebels. That one's set for 11 a.m. broadcast on ESPN3. And then Ole Miss, since this is a tournament, they will take on either Oklahoma State or Towson on Friday. So Ole Miss hoops, it's really big to get these non-conference wins, because that's how the NCAA tournament, that's how they judge you at the end of the season. We saw last year Ole Miss won the Emerald Coast Classic. That they had wins over Creighton and Cincinnati, and then the year before that they won the Barclays Classic up in Brooklyn. So, can the Rebels make it a sweep and win another non-conference tournament? Let's hope so. Again, that's the Gildan Charleston Classic. That one is set for Thursday and goes through the weekend. Let's talk Ole Miss women's basketball. The Lady Rebs started out 1-0, but unfortunately fell to Louisiana Lafayette this past Sunday, 82-78. Just a disappointing loss for the Rebels. They were picked 6 in the conference. Really disappointing when they couldn't be undefeated non-conference. They'll have to regroup, and they have a game Thursday as well against Missouri State. That one's set for 6 p.m. at the Tad Smith Coliseum. And then after that, the Rebels will have a date. Matt Insel will have a date with his father, Rick Insel. They play next Sunday at Middle Tennessee State, so a little father-son action on that one. Also, Ole Miss soccer, they get the win in the NCAA tournament over Murray State 1-0, and now the Rebels have a tough task as they'll take on Clemson, the number 17 ranked Tigers. That one is actually at Clemson, South Carolina, so the Rebels will play there Friday, and they'll try to advance in the NCAA tournament. Hopefully the Rebels will keep it going. Ole Miss volleyball, of course, They split this past weekend with losing in 5 sets to Texas A&M, but they did beat LSU 3-1 in 4 sets in that one. So the Rebels are back in action as they will travel to Auburn, Alabama, to take on the Auburn Tigers this past or coming up on Friday. So a lot going on for Ole Miss volleyball. They're still, they're 7-7 in SEC play, trying to make a push to make the NCAA tournament. So hopefully the Rebels can stack up some wins down the stretch of the season as they are trying to continue the success of the soccer team and much more Ole Miss sports. Well, that wraps up this week's show on Hotty Toddy Hotline. Again, I want to thank Sudu, Upadhyay, Chad LaBorde for coming on the show. Ole Miss, Alabama, again, 2:30 this Saturday at Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. It should be a great one. My name is Browning Stubbs. You're listening to Hotty Toddy Hotline, a production of CRM Sports on the Colonel Web Radio Network. I want to thank our executive producer, John Rawl. We'll see you next week.